All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Kara. I work here as the program director at the Quag Wildlife Refuge. So thank you for joining us tonight. We are very lucky to know Bob because he has been coming to the refuge and monitoring Old Ice Pond at the refuge for a number of years now, along with our staff that tries to jump in and help when we have time. But he is a source, a great resource in our area and our town. And the refuge is very lucky to work closely with him. Just as an update, the Quag Wildlife Refuge is open every day from sunrise to sunset. We have 7 miles of hiking trails that you can come and visit anytime when the sun is out. And we do educational programs throughout the year. Our nature center is currently almost under construction for a renovation, which is very exciting. So we are doing more virtual programs through the spring, and then we'll start again probably in the fall, and then also in-person programs. So we've got a lot of fun stuff planned for the month of May, and then our summer newsletter will be coming out soon. So keep an eye out on our website for upcoming events. We have a fun nature journaling program in 2 weeks on May 16th. So that's a fun one too, in case you want to come down, check out the pond, and then sign up for another program. But I am happy to introduce Bob Moser, who is here from the Citizen Science Learning Center. And Bob has created a great mission for this organization of Adopt a Pond. So he's going to tell us all about how to become a pond keeper today. So thank you for being with us, Bob.
Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for coming tonight. And I hope it's informative, and I tell you something you didn't know before, and we have a good dialogue, and maybe you can get involved and help our town pay a little more attention to our freshwater bodies, which is kind of why I've gotten started on all this to begin with. So just a quick comment. You mentioned the ospreys, and I was just going around the traffic circle in West Hampton Beach by the Sunset Theater, the new theater there, and there's an osprey nest on one of the telephone poles right there in the traffic circle. And as I went by, it sounded like I could hear peeps going on. Maybe it was just the parents. I don't know that the birds would have hatched yet. I'm not that familiar with osprey, but anyway, it's kind of cool. And I have a friend who just actually retired from PSE&G, and they have a program where if you see an osprey nest on one of their poles, you call them up, and they work with the DEC to possibly either relocate the birds or provide some other platform for them elsewhere. Anyway. Just thought I'd mention that. All right, so I'll just start in here. So who am I? I have just a brief bio on me, just so you know where I'm coming from and how I got here. So I have a master's degree in geology from SUNY Oneonta, kind of a long time ago. After I received my master's in traditional geologic investigations. But my thesis work was focused on water quality, specifically groundwater. So I came out of my master's program with an idea that I wanted to focus on environmental issues and certainly groundwater contamination. So for 25 years, I worked in the environmental consulting business as a hydrogeologist, where primarily my job, at the very beginning, and then all the way after 23 years, I wound up being project director for certain projects. But primarily, it is characterizing the nature and extent of soil and groundwater contamination at Superfund sites. And then I had always had a passion ever since having an opportunity to be a TA at Oneonta. Had a passion for teaching, so I left the consulting business after 23 years and went back to school, got my certification when I was in my 50s in 7 through 12 earth science and general science. And I taught science. I like to say I tried to teach science to 12-year-olds for 16 years. those 12-year-olds were a bigger challenge than most of the clients I ever worked for. So I think some of you might be able to appreciate what I'm saying. So I did that for 16 years at William Floyd Middle School. When they opened the building, the new William Floyd Middle down in Center Moriches, I started there in 2003. So after 16 years, I had enough fun. I was already 70, and it was time to go. And so I came out of that, and I started to realize I was kind of following what Chris Gobler was doing and harmful algal blooms. And I started to realize that our surface water, our freshwater ponds, lakes and ponds in our town were sort of, I don't know what you call them, second class citizens or second fiddles or whatever. But it just seemed like that the marine environment is, for obvious reasons, getting a lot of attention, and rightfully so. They drive a lot of our industry here on Long Island, and not so much our freshwater lakes and ponds. People usually don't come to Long Island to vacation or to live here because of our freshwater ponds. It's usually because of our marine environment. So I get that. But I do see that the lakes and ponds are overlooked, and I'll tell you a little bit more as to why. So I then started a Citizen Science Learning Center in 2023 because the only way to really get funding for any of the work that I was trying to do required us to be a 501c3. So we are an official 501c3. In July 2023, we got that certification. Right now, our current board of directors include 2 certified hydrogeologists. I'm one of them. A PhD GIS professor who teaches at Farmingdale State College. 2 New York State certified science teachers. One of them is myself. And also Jock Comer, who is retired from West Hampton Beach High School, as an environmental teacher up there. Some of you may know who he is. We also have a pharmaceutical QA/QC specialist, and it's not because he's got experience in pharmaceuticals, because this has nothing to do with pharmaceuticals. It's his QA/QC. Quality assurance, quality control of water quality in that industry. So they had very strict protocols for their water quality in the lab there, as well as I think he was involved also with environmental issues at some of the pharmaceutical companies. We also have a chemical engineer. It's on our board, and also a business management consultant. So that's our board of directors. And our mission is basically educating, engaging students. And I put that in single quotes because no matter how old you are, hopefully you still consider yourself a student, and are willing and interested in learning new things. That's certainly my philosophy on life. And so it's students of all ages and all walks of life and the science of things all around them. And my approach, both from my training and technical background in conducting investigations characterizing soil and groundwater at Superfund sites, we had to do the science that would stand up to the scrutiny of to the regulators like the DEC or the EPA. When we're trying to make an argument that we've done our job, we'd have to convince them, like you have to do in science. But then also my education passion is to provide students with authentic projects, authentic hands-on projects. And that's the kind of thing that makes me happy, is when I see young people or even adults excited about learning new stuff. Okay. So that is what Citizen Science Learning Center is. Okay. Now, Long Island's
Bob,
Lakes.
sorry. Sorry to interrupt, Bob. There was just a question in the chat about QA and QC. Would you mind explaining that again?
Again, QA/QC, the acronym there is Quality Assurance, Quality Control. So it really has to do with, like, when you're out collecting water samples, you have to have a protocol for making sure that you're following procedures that have been documented. Like when you're collecting your sample from a well or a pond, you rinse the bucket or the sampling thing 3 times. You calibrate your instruments before you make your measurements, and you document all that. So it's a process, and QA/QC just refers to quality assurance, quality control, so that the data that you get at the end of your activities is valid and can be used to make decisions. Hope that helped. Okay, so what are lakes versus ponds? And honestly, it's really semantics. I don't know if there's really a size limit when something becomes a lake versus when it's a pond. But there are certain water bodies, like Lake Agawam is called Lake Agawam. Wildwood Lake is called Wildwood Lake. But then you have Old Ice Pond is called a pond. So it's really, I think, semantics. And sometimes it's just a matter of how that water body was named over time. So some of the ponds, the lakes and ponds here on Long Island, are natural glacial kettle holes that are filled with water. And Long Island was part of the surface of Long Island was basically developed after the last advance of ice. Glacial ice. It was a continental ice sheet that moved from the North Pole and came as far south as Long Island. And mostly the island is split in half by the moraine to the north of the middle part of the Long Island. There's actually 2 of them where it marks the edge of the ice sheet, and then it backed off. So we have the Ronkonkoma moraine, we have the Harbor Hill moraine. And within that area, and even south of that, which is considered the outwash plain, which typically the South Shore is relatively flat compared to the North Shore, there are these holes, these glacial kettle holes that represent a large chunk of ice that got buried in the sediment as the ice was draining and shedding all of its sand and gravel and cobbles out in front of it, and the chunk of ice would get frozen in place and then eventually buried. And when it melted, left a big depression and then eventually filled in with water. So that's a kettle hole. But some of these ponds, and I learned about this, as I was going along here. I live in Spionk, and there are several ponds right here along Montauk Highway, starting in Eastport. And these ponds are impoundments. They were built by humans, basically a tidal estuary. And when the settlers got here, they put up a dam. And by putting up a dam, they backed the fresh water that was coming from upstream, up gradient. It backed the water up behind it, created an elevation difference between the pond and the tidal estuary. And then they built a big water wheel and connected it to gears in a mill building, and they cut lumber and they ground up grain and all that stuff. So many of our small lakes and ponds are actually impoundments that were built by humans back, in some cases, 200 years ago. Now, all of these lakes and ponds are fed mostly by groundwater flowing up through the bottom sediments. Some people call them springs. Okay, well, they're underwater springs, but a spring in geologic terminology, a spring is where groundwater surfaces at the land surface and becomes the headwater of a stream. But however you want to think about it, it's essentially there's groundwater that's flowing through the bottom sediments, and basically you're looking at the surface of the water table. When you look at the surface of a pond, that is the expression of the water table, and the water table rises up around all 360 degrees around that pond and is pretty much keeping the water there. And usually there's an inlet at one end where surface water is draining into it, and there's usually an outflow at the other end. Some of them you don't really see a distinct inlet and an outlet. Like we work up on Laurel Lake and Marituka Lake, and there's no obvious surface water inlet or outlet, but it's there and it's being supported by groundwater. And there is a limited amount of runoff that's coming into these ponds that keeps the levels up. And it will go up and down mainly based on groundwater levels, but it also can rise and fall because of the amount of runoff from precipitation. But all of these ponds, they all drain into our marine environment. So if those ponds, the water quality of those ponds are bad, then they will affect the water quality of our bays. So I think it's important for us to pay attention to these freshwater ponds, even though we don't recreate in them as much as people recreate in our marine environment. Okay, I'm going to move on. Now, in the town of Southampton, there are over 200 freshwater lakes and ponds. Now, that was kind of a shock to me because I had heard that there were like 99. But when I did a little bit more digging into it, there is actually over 200 freshwater ponds in our town alone, never mind the other East End towns. At least 6 of them have documented water quality issues. Lake Agawam has a problem. Mill Pond has a problem in Watermill. There's a few of them like that we've been looking at, Silverbrook Pond, Ida's Pond. Some of these have documented water quality issues. Now, of these 200 ponds, the trustees stock 10 of them with brook trout each year. So they're dumping, in the case of the smaller ponds, they're dumping 100 10-inch brook trout into these ponds. Between Big Fresh Pond and in Noyak and Wildwood Lake, I don't know how they came up with the number, but they put 285 brook trout in those ponds. So just a little bit of background information, and it's really the town trustees that have the jurisdiction and responsibility over these freshwater ponds. And just a point to be aware of is there's no town-initiated program to monitor the survival rates of the fish that they put in the ponds. They have a program, and it's been going on for many years, but just information for you that they are doing this, and there is no official monitoring program to check on the survival rates of the fish that they put in there. There's also no Southampton Town sampling and analysis program to characterize the water quality of our lakes and ponds. There is intermittent things that are happening here and there, and we're part of that, but there's no official sampling and analysis program for this purpose. Citizen Science Learning Center has been monitoring 7 of those 200 ponds over the last 5 years, attempting to characterize the water quality as best we can with the limited resources we have. So, just so you know that we've been monitoring 7 of them. And we picked 7, the 7 that we picked was primarily because they were near to me. Again, I live in Spion-Remsenburg, and so the 7 ponds we're monitoring start in Eastport, on the town border, and we go east up as far as Quogue Wildlife and Old Ice Pond, and then we go north to Wildwood Lake and to Silverbrook Pond in Flanders. Three of our ponds are being stocked with the brook trout or river trout by the trustees. That includes East Pond and Eastport, um, um, Beaver Dam Pond in West Hampton Beach, and Wildwood Lake up in Northampton.
Sorry, Bob, for the interruption. There were a few questions that I thought might go well here before we move on. One question was about the trout in the ponds. What is the thinking behind putting the trout into the ponds?
You'd have to ask the trustees that question, but my understanding is that they're putting the fish in there so people can go fishing. Um,
Hmm.
and the people that I've seen fishing, I usually, if I see somebody fishing in one of the ponds, I will stop and chat it up with them and tell them what I'm doing. And most of the times, people that I've spoken to, everyone has said it's just a catch and release. So there are other fish in there besides the brook trout, but it's typically catch and release. But I do think that there's a growing population of people in our town that see it as a resource for food.
Mm. Okay, thank you. And then there was just one more question about, do any other states regulate the health of their ponds?
There are others. I mean, the state of New York does have a water quality monitoring program. There's something that's called the acronym is called CSLAP, and it's something like Citizen Science Lake and Pond Sampling Program. It's a volunteer based program. But there's only three ponds in the town of Southampton that are being monitored under the CSLAP program. That's Big Fresh Pond, Little Fresh Pond, and Long Pond on the Greenbelt. But beyond that, there's not much else being done here in New York. Other states, I'm not quite sure of. I mean, I do know that Cape Cod, when we start getting into talking about harmful algal blooms, Cape Cod is all over this. They're real serious about the water quality of their freshwater ponds, especially with respect to harmful algal blooms. Was there another question?
Those are all the ones that I found in the chat.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. I'll move on. All right, so water quality issues, what do we mean? What are we talking about? So there are physical and chemical water quality issues to be concerned about. Things like temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, salinity, something called oxidation reduction potential. These are things that when you want to try to characterize water quality, you need to make these measurements because, especially with respect to ecology and a healthy water quality, the temperature is important, the pH is important. Certain fish can only exist in certain ranges of pH. Dissolved oxygen is critical, and certainly salinity, depending on the fish. So those are physical and chemical parameters that when we're in the field, we measure these things. So we have a record of what's going on with respect to those things. Plant nutrients, which I highlighted in black because I want to talk about that in more detail, specifically nitrogen and phosphorus. These are two compounds that are important with respect to the growth of macrophytes in the plant in the pond. Macrophytes are just large waterborne plants. I'm not a biologist; I'm a geologist, so some of my terminology may be a little off. But we all understand that you put nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium on your lawn because it's a plant nutrient. So it's important to know what the concentrations of those two elements are in your water to tell whether there's too much of it in the water and you have lots of things growing or too little. All right, then you have the biological aspects of water quality and invasive plants. There are lots of invasive plants that are kind of um, choking some of these ponds. And it, back in the day when people first moved here, in the 50s, they talk about some of these ponds were crystal clear and beautiful swimming. And now they're just so over choked with plants that, they don't even go in the water anymore. So that's a consideration. And then the one I want to focus on here is something I call cyanohabs. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we move on. Were there any questions before I go to the next slide?
There was one question about would changing people's ideas about a quote unquote healthy lawns be helpful? Is clover the answer?
Oh, is well, the answer to the first question, I would say yes. It's important for people to understand, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But in terms of using clover, I pay attention to native planting groups and so on and so forth, and I keep hearing that clover is considered an invasive. It's not native. Um, so I don't want to get into an argument as to whether it's good or bad. All right. So what are cyanobacteria? They're also known as, I know it's a little confusing because in one name it says bacteria and another one it's called algae, and it's a whole biology thing, but they're the same. Cyanobacteria are blue-green algae. Now, what are they? Well, single-celled organisms. They've been on the planet for over 4.2 billion years. And I just read that was updated from 3.9 billion years. So it's a long time that they've been around. So this isn't anything new. And by the way, they're the ones that created the oxygen atmosphere we breathe today. So you got to give them credit for that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. But when their numbers reach a certain threshold population in surface water and then also in marine water, they're called harmful algal blooms. You probably heard the term HABs, but it's better. I like to use cyanohabs instead because we're being specific about the blue-green algae that are occurring in freshwater ponds. Okay, that's who we're kind of focused on here tonight. There are many different species, but about 5 of them can produce cyanotoxins. Now, if any of you have gone to Chris Gobler's State of the Bay, and he just had one, roughly a week ago, he's been talking about this for a bunch of years. So I'm not the expert on it, but Chris and I have partnered over the years, and he had a DEC grant that allowed me to collect water samples from our ponds, bring it to him, and he would run an analysis to determine whether or not we had reached that threshold for cyanobacteria, and it was officially a bloom. So he's really the guy, but as of now, he no longer has the funding to do that kind of work from the DEC, and now DEC is relying strictly on visual observations, and basically it's an observation that you'll make using your phone and an app, taking a few pictures and submitting it off to the DEC, and then the DEC will look at the pictures and say, looks like a bloom, you got a bloom, and then notifications go out and signs go up. So that's how it's being done now by the DEC. Although Chris still has some grant monies for monitoring some of the ponds on a very limited basis, monitoring some of the ponds for cyanobacteria that had a history of cyanobacteria. And we were bringing samples of our ponds to him, and only one of them actually had reached that level of being a cyano HAB. And if you don't like what you hear as far as the government and the regulatory agencies doing what you think they should be doing, you got to talk to your legislators and your politicians, because they're the ones that are bending to what's going on, and the reduction in staff at the regulatory level as well as funding. Now, these cyanoHABs represent a health risk to humans, their pets, and especially dogs and other wildlife. Now, I'm going to say that most humans are not likely to jump in the water. I'll show you some pictures of what a HAB looks like. You're not likely to jump in that water and go splashing around and hanging out there for a while. But a dog, on the other hand, they're not going to know any better, and it's a serious. It can be a serious risk to dogs that go into a pond where there's a harmful algal bloom happening. So the exposure routes include ingestion, drinking the water. If you get it on your skin, you can have a reaction, an adverse reaction with dermal contact, and then as well inhalation. So being exposed to, let's say, a pond has a bloom, and there's a big fountain that's spraying this water up into the air. And if you're in the vicinity, you might inhale the actual water droplets that are being put into the air, and also containing the algae that could be toxic. And I say could because not all of them are toxic, but they could be. Now, just in terms of how lethal these toxins are, cattle have been killed within 15 minutes of drinking water that contain these deadly cyanotoxins. So it can happen pretty quickly. And I know of at least one case, not here on Long Island, but it was this past year. I was reading a story about a woman that had her dog in a pond that was contaminated. And when the dog came out of the water, basically, by the time the dog got back to the car, it was showing signs of exposure. The dog was lethargic and difficult getting back into the car, and the dog literally died on her way to taking the dog to the vet. So it can cause damage to liver, kidneys, heart, the brain, and muscles. Many times the symptoms go undiagnosed because medical professionals and veterinarians are not informed about cyanoHABs. I just attended an EPA webinar. It was a 4-day webinar, and they were talking about the medical doctors, and I even spoke to my own primary healthcare doctor, and mentioning this to him, and he wanted to be informed about what the symptoms might be, because you might have a child that's exposed, and then they show some symptoms that are not able to diagnose, and you go to the doctor, and the doctor just doesn't know what it is because they don't even know what a HAB is or what harmful algal blooms are. So I think it's important for this information to get out to both veterinarians and the medical profession. And before I move to the next slide, there are at least 5 ponds in our town that have had a history of HABs. Were there any questions in the chat?
Yes, there were 2. The first one was about, have you heard of Back to the Bays from Cornell Cooperative Extension Marine Program? They're placing oyster reefs in quag.
Yeah. Yes. I'm familiar with them, and I've been chatting with them about this as well. And again, they're mainly focused on marine. I do have a tentative meeting with Chris Pickrell to talk about maybe getting a little bit more involved in the freshwater issues.
Great. And the other question was, how does one have a pond tested?
Well, right now, Chris Gobler he's the only one on Long Island that I'm aware of that can do the analysis to actually tell you what the concentration of cyanobacteria is, followed up with a toxicity analysis that tells you whether that particular organism had the toxins in it. But you can't just go to him right now with a sample and say, can you analyze this water for me? And like I said before, what I'm trying to encourage everybody on this call to do is to basically sign up to pick a pond, decide what your favorite pond is nearby, and whenever you go there, or make a habit out of going there once a week and using the app. And I'm going to share it with you in a little while. Using the app on your phone, just document what you see, and it's just a simple matter of taking two pictures: one picture of the water itself, hopefully without a glare off the surface of the water, and another one that sort of shows the shoreline of where you're standing, and then submit it, and then we'll hand it off to the DEC, and then they'll make that determination. Okay, hopefully I answered that question. I mean, if anybody wants to follow up with me on the phone later, another day, I'll be happy to chat with you about all of this. Okay, so in the town we have 5 ponds at least that have a history of cyanoHABs. So again, back to what they are. They're blue-green algae. They use photosynthesis as their energy, but they also require the 3 main nutrients: phosphorus, nitrogen, and potassium, just like stuff you buy, from Scott's for your lawn. Now, where does this stuff come from? Well, from the soil minerals that are being dissolved and brought into the ponds. Atmospheric nitrogen is actually dissolving into the water. We have stormwater runoff that's carrying fertilizers, nutrients from the land. And then we have groundwater seepage that's carrying nitrogen, nitrate, coming from septic tanks. And there's a big push in the county and the town to have people change out their septic systems with the new IA systems that remove the nitrogen before it gets into our groundwater. And again, most of these sources are from human activity. So when we see levels of nitrate in a pond that exceed, I'm just going to say 1 milligram per liter, because that is about the level. If it exceeds that number, it typically means that level is as a result of human activities. Anything less than that is normally considered background levels for nitrogen. And on Long Island, there's being a geologist again, the sediments here on Long Island don't contain phosphorus, for the most part, don't contain phosphorus-containing minerals. So most of the phosphorus that we're seeing in our lakes and ponds are coming from either fertilizers or legacy detergents back in the day, when phosphorus was used in our laundry detergents that was banned here in Suffolk County, I think back in the 70s. All right, so here's some pictures finally. Too many words on slides. So this is these are some stock DEC pictures that you'll see when you actually use the DEC's survey. So this is the kind of color that you can expect to see. It also can be a little bit more on the turquoise side and kind of blotchy. We had a bloom at Laurel Lake last summer that we identified. And while the water was crystal clear for the most part, there were these blotches of almost turquoise colored blotches of cyanobacteria. And we took a sample of it, brought it to Chris Gobler, and he confirmed that it was cyanobacteria, and we had levels that were high enough to be considered a bloom. This picture is a picture of Lake Agawam. So I took this picture at the north end of Lake Agawam, and this is what Lake Agawam looks like in the summer. So if you want to see for yourself what an algal bloom looks like, just head off to Lake Agawam. It probably will bloom sometime this month, and it probably won't go away until late October or November. And there's me standing there at the south end, the parking lot there at the south end, just by the sand dunes. You can see the greenish color here near my feet and the dock. The blue out in the distance is not the color of the water. That's the reflection off the sky. So that's what a bloom looks like. And at Lake Agawam, it's literally across the entire lake and pretty much the whole water column. And when it happens, this is the sign that they put up. When I say they, it's the DEC that initiates the signage that then gets handed off to the Suffolk County Health Department. And then the health department, depending on how far away it is, how far away the pond is from their office, they may hand it off to the trustees, and then trustees hand it off to the marine maintenance people to put a sign up at the pond. But it's a warning sign. It does not say that a bloom has occurred, and it does not say if a bloom has disappeared. And the sign, apparently, I've never seen any of the signs been taken down. So once a sign is up, it's just it's a warning that's there for as long as the sign lasts. And you can like that situation or not, and if you don't, and I don't, you can say something to your elected officials who are all talking about their concern for water quality. So what can we do? And, if you can't get the regulators or the government to do it, what can we do? Well, and this goes back to an earlier question, we can reduce the amount of, or completely eliminate fast-acting fertilizer that we use in our yards, or eliminate it altogether. These fast-acting fertilizer are essentially salt. It's a form of salt, and salt is specifically a chemical term for a compound that will dissolve into the components very readily in water. We all know if you put sodium chloride, table salt, in water, it dissolves. And these fast-acting fertilizers, they dissolve quickly. They get into the plant roots quickly. You get a quick response from the plants. They get nice and green. But then every time it rains, those salts are being washed through the soil column and into our groundwater. Organic fertilizers that are not fast-acting, and I don't mean to promote a product here, but Milorganite is an organic fertilizer that is kind of a slow release. So if we can reduce the amount of those types of fertilizers fast-acting, we can help prevent nitrogen and phosphorus from getting into our groundwater. We can mitigate runoff to our waterways using engineered bioswales. These are and Quag Wildlife has them along Old Country Road now. So if you haven't been over there, take a look. So now the runoff that would normally just go right into the lake or into the pond now is diverted into these swales, these low spots that are planted with plants that will basically absorb the nutrients before it gets into the pond. So that's something that can be done, and that project was all paid for by the Community Preservation Fund in the town of Southampton. And here's a big one: replace cesspools and septic tanks with the innovative alternative IA nitrogen removal systems. There are over 360,000 septic systems in Suffolk County that should all be replaced with these IA systems or some type of system that's going to remove the nitrogen. And as of relatively recently, a little over 5,000 of them have currently been removed and replaced with IA systems. And the whole program has gotten much better. I mean, in the beginning, the program, one was slow because the folks at the county were overloaded, and two, people were actually, because there was grant money available, they actually had to pay taxes on that money that came to them as a result of replacing their system. So if the system costs $30,000, they were paying taxes on $30,000 worth of capital improvement. That's been changed. And right now, if you're not aware, these IA systems can be installed at almost no cost to the homeowner through the town and the county. The state's involved with this too. And a little more on that. I have a QR code up here, which is a link to the Suffolk County system, Suffolk County website, where if you want to get involved with doing this, you can go through this link to the website and consider doing this yourself. Now, if you're close to a surface water body, you are in a priority zone and you sort of go to the top of the list for consideration. But even with that, unless your system is absolutely failing, it may be 2 years before you actually have your system replaced. So, and applying for it there's no money involved up front. There's strictly, it's really just securing your the funding, and then if it gets to the point and you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. So there's no risk if you apply, and the money is there now. Now, before I go on, does anybody have? I thought I saw some questions popping up in the chat.
Yes, there were a few questions in the chat, and one of them was, do you have any resources or can you make available talking points for those of us who are busy or disorganized and or forgetful about, I believe this was about to your elected officials.
Okay, I mean, again, I can share this presentation with you. If I have your email address, I'd be happy to share it with you. I know this is being recorded and that's going to be shared. But it's a good question, and I can, if you email me and remind me, because I'll forget, to do something like that, I'd be happy to do that.
Great. And I'll put your email in the chat for everyone, Bob, because there was another question about that before.
Yep.
And another comment from Caroline was really great about, in Pittsburgh, there were plaques that people had on their front lawns that said the property was bird friendly. Could we do something similar? We need signage to help people be more aware and advertise eco-friendly lawns, which is a good point. I like that.
Yeah. Again, I'm overwhelmed and overloaded right now with projects of trying to, keep this organization. I never had an intention of starting a business, never mind a nonprofit, when I was in my 70s, and here I am. And so, if you want to spearhead something like that, we can be part of that program if you want.
Great. And then another question was, what can people who live in condominium complexes do regarding sewage treatment plants, fertilizers, herbicides, etc.? It's like a mafia, and so much money is being made from this mega industry.
Okay. In terms of living in a condo with a sewage treatment plant, sewage treatment plants are permitted, as well as our septic tanks are permitted by Suffolk County Health Department, and they have. And I'm not naive enough to think that there aren't ways around all of this stuff, but there are regulations in place for the sewage treatment plant to meet a standard that takes the nitrogen levels down. I mean, nitrogen is not going to be removed entirely, but it's designed to take the levels down to a level that satisfies our drinking water standards and the impacts to surface water. What you can do to change their, I don't know. It's a that's a hard sell, and you'd have to know who your landlord is and try to pay attention to how they manage their properties and try to educate them in better ways.
Great, thank you. And I did put Bob's email in the chat, and I know someone had suggested pollinator pathways for signage, and I do think other wildlife organizations have signs like that, but specifically for like river-friendly lawns, I haven't heard of anything, but I'll look into it, and if I find anything, I'll send it to everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. So continuing on with replacing your systems, the New York State Center for Clean Water Technology and Chris Gobler is involved with this organization as well. They are there to help with the grant application. And if you go to the county's website and you try to fill out the online form, you're probably going to stop pretty quick because it gets complicated and you get, I don't really feel like doing this. But you can contact Tom Varley, who is at the New York Center for Clean Water Technology, and he will, with your authorization. So you have to sign a little piece of paper that says, "I authorize," the New York Center for Clean Water Technology to process this application on my behalf. And you basically provide Tom with the information, and he processes the application, and there's no fee. So you don't have to worry about paying somebody to do this. And he's a great guy, and he's very helpful. And they're on a mission to do this. So feel free to contact Tom, and you can tell him that Bob Moser suggested. And I don't know if he's going to hate me for this, but anyway, he's the guy that you should talk to. All right. All right. So now let's get into what it is that we're doing. What are our sampling programs? So what we're doing in Southampton, we've been monitoring 7 lakes and ponds since 2021. We've been monitoring for cyano-HAB events. We've monitored or characterized the nitrogen and phosphorus compounds for a baseline and seasonal characterization. In other words, we want to know where are we right now with respect to these 2 elements that are really critical for harmful algal blooms to happen. The other thing is that the samples that we've collected over the years, we don't just do it during the summer. Like the state CSLC program I mentioned to you before, they only go out in the summer and they do their water quality characterizations in the summer. Well, when we started sampling, coming from my background and what I used to have to do, in the Superfund world, you got to look at the whole year worth of monitoring to see, are there changes that are happening throughout the season? And we are seeing seasonal differences in between the winter and the summer. The levels of nitrogen and phosphorus during the winter appear, and we don't have a lot of data, appear to be higher in the winter and lower in the summer. And so if you only looked at the summer months, you might say, oh, it doesn't look so bad. But in the winter, if you look at it, you go, oh, this is a lot higher. Now, why is that? Well, my hypothesis on that would be that the loading of nitrogen and phosphorus coming into the ponds from groundwater is constant. So it's constantly coming in, and whatever runoff is coming in, it's also contributing. But as soon as the plants start growing, now that those concentrations are being reduced by the fact that the plants are consuming these nutrients as part of their growing process. So that's what we've done. That's what we've been focused on. And when we're in the field, we always collect parameters. We call them field parameters of temperature, pH, total dissolved solid, specific conductivity, dissolved oxygen, and oxidation reduction potential. That's what we do. We have the instruments to do that. I'm not suggesting that you go out and buy these instruments so you can do it. But if you're so inclined, I can certainly give you the specs for that kind of stuff. The ponds that we've been monitoring for the last 5+ years are West Pond and East Pond in Eastport, Mill Pond in Spionk, right here by the old mill building that John Canis brought back to life. Beaver Dam Pond in West Hampton, Old Ice Pond at Quogue Wildlife, Silverbrook Pond, which is in Flanders, just off of Route 24. You would probably never even know it was there unless you turned down Oak Avenue and drove up alongside of it. And then finally, Wildwood Lake up in Northampton. Now let's see if this link works. We use something called geographic information systems for all of our data activities. And this is a map that shows the ponds. So here's the border of the town of Southampton, and these are the 7 ponds that we've been monitoring. Now, right now we're working on a public-facing interactive map so that you can click on these points and bring up information. Okay, with respect to monitoring or observing cyano-HABs, Silverbrook Pond over there in Flanders, it exceeded the threshold for cyano-HABs 3 times in the last several years. Wildwood Lake had an elevated level of cyano, but it did not exceed that threshold to be considered a bloom. Same with Old Ice Pond. We had an elevated level. It got halfway up to the threshold, and then the following, after 2 weeks, went back down to sort of background levels. So with respect to the 7 ponds that we've been monitoring, this is what we've observed for cyano-HABs in those 7 ponds. Now, with respect to phosphorus, and the DEC does have a guideline for phosphorus levels for freshwater recreation. It's 30, I think it's 30 micrograms per liter. It's pretty low, but we did see an exceedance of that threshold for both Silverbrook Pond and Ida's Pond. Silverbrook Pond basically drains into Ida's Pond, and then Ida's Pond drains into Peconic Bay. With respect to total nitrogen, the levels in Silverbrook Pond and West Pond indicate that there's impact from either runoff or the high density of residential cesspools and septic systems. Certainly, Silverbrook Pond is, uphill from Silverbrook Pond is just all very small cottage-like houses that are all on their own sanitary wastewater systems, and most likely they're cesspools and not septic tanks. West Pond is a little, doesn't have as much population around it, but it could be coming from the runoff right there. So what are we recommending? We've been recommending to the town board, as well as to the environmental analysts at the town, as well as the town trustees, that it would be a good idea to prioritize of the 200 freshwater ponds, which ones should we be spending our time on? And we think that it should be based on public access. If there's no public access to speak of, then, well, maybe we can't spend the money or the time on it. Is it being used regularly for recreational use? I mean, think about Wildwood Lake up in Northampton. I mean, there's public access there on both sides. It's certainly being used for recreational purposes, for swimming, for fishing, for boating. Whether or not there's a plan for a fish ladder, might be nice to know where the fish are going and whether the pond is healthy. And there's right now a proposal to put a fish ladder at Ida's Pond. If you don't know what a fish ladder is, I'd be happy to explain what that is. And then another thing to base it on would be whether there's been a history of cyano-HABs. That would be something to continue to monitor. And whether the trustees are putting fish in those ponds would be a good reason to monitor them. This is just a link to the trustees. I don't know if I can zoom in on it. I can, but it's not behaving. This is just, it's on the trustees website. You can see which ponds are being stocked with how many fish, and here's the map. See if it loads. Okay, so here's the town trustees locations for stocking the ponds. So they're scattered across the town. So what we're recommending to the town is to support our education program, to engage students. I just reached out to West Hampton Beach High School saying that we can, if kids sign up to do this, they can get community service credit from us by going to the ponds with some frequency. And when they do, and they use the form that we ask them to fill out, it documents when they were there and what time they were there. So we would have a record to show the school if they asked, why did they get credit for this? We think that there should be some form of notification system, and it's simply to use a QR code that could be posted at a public access point to our both marine and freshwater resources to let people know, has the pond been sampled? When was it sampled? What was it sampled for? And what's the latest condition of the pond? And I mentioned here that the Cape Cod is all over this. And they've got an amazing monitoring program up there. I have a link to their website. And I mean, they've been around for a long time, this organization. So, but I think they've only been monitoring HABs for maybe the last 4 or 5 years. But they've got, they're a real model for our town or our county to follow for this type of program. All right, talk a little bit about funding, where we're getting funding from. Town CPF, if you're familiar with the Community Preservation Fund, there's a lot of money in the Town Preservation Community Preservation Fund. However, it will not, because of the way the legislation was written, it will not allow for just us going out, collecting water samples to characterize the water quality. But if you do have a problem and you somehow have found the money to characterize the water and it is a problem, the CPF has money to fix it. Okay, so they don't pay for the testing, but they will pay to fix the problem. What we're trying to do is to not have a problem and not have to fix anything. But that's the state of the situation with the town and the CPF. There was a citizen science fund that was set up several years ago of $5,000. The town wanted to create to make it available for programs like ours, but apparently it has been spent, and whether it's going to be replaced is unknown. I haven't been able to get anybody to answer that. So where else are we getting? From personal and business donations to our 501c3, and of course, a lot of volunteer time from us and other people that are volunteering. Last year, the town board provided $7,000 to cover the lab fees for the nutrient analysis that we did for nitrogen and phosphorus over the course of last year. And each one of those samples cost about $70 to analyze. And we have to ship the samples to a lab upstate New York. They're certified, they're New York State DEC certified to do this analysis. And the DEC uses that lab for their own work. And so they're the lab to go to. Unfortunately, there's no lab on Long Island that has the credentials to do the analysis that's required for us to see what we need to see in terms of the concentrations. So that was 2025. And right now, there's been no commitment by the town to continue to fund it. But I've been speaking with Tom Neely and with Marty Shea at the town about possibly funding this for 2026 as well. So these are the projects that we're doing in 2026. We're continuing to sample the prioritized lakes and ponds for basic water chemistry and nutrients. We'll continue to monitor lakes and ponds for cyanoHABs as best we can, including any volunteers that we can get through through this program. I've reached out to the libraries in the town and doing the same presentation to try to get folks like yourself to make routine observations of our ponds, because right now that's really all the DEC is asking for in terms of cyanoHABs. We are also hiring a couple of student interns from Farmingdale and Stony Brook University to work on our summer projects. They will be paid for their time. We're also working with the New York State Sea Grant, their Waterways Ambassador. They have an internship program. So we have a student there that will participate in going to the selected ponds that we've identified during the summer for HAB observations. And if we get the funding to do the lab analysis, then the student will be involved in collecting water samples for lab analysis. Right now, we're also working with Save the Sound at 2 locations to monitor water quality in Goldsmith Inlet in Cutchogue and Mattatuck Creek, also up there. And this summer, we have a Pond Keeper Field Camp that's being done through the Pecana Community School. It's a 5-day program, and we'll be bringing the kids to 5 different locations on the North Fork to do a bunch of activities with the kids. It's for kids from grade 4 through 7. And if there are any questions, people can ask questions. I'm getting pretty close to the end here. And just some pictures of us in the field. You may see my truck around with Adopt a Pond on it. Here's a student from Farmingdale, and this is a professor from Farmingdale. He's the GIS professor, and we're out sampling regularly. Our field notes, we record everything on paper as well as digitally on our phones. Here we are doing a program at Laurel Lake with the Pecana Community School kids. We took them there 4 times last year. That was all part of a funding through the PEP mini grant that we got last year. Unfortunately, they did not renew the mini grant for us this year. So those programs have stalled until we find other sources of funding. So here we are in Laurel Lake with seining nets. And this is just so much fun with the kids. They're out there. And I know Karen knows this at Quag Wildlife. You get the kids outside collecting bugs and frogs and other cool critters and characterizing them. Here's Jock Comer from West Hampton Beach. Some of you may know him, looking at organisms and identifying them with the kids. And this was, I think this was like in February or March that we were out there with the kids. They really had a blast. All right, so how can you help? You can adopt your own pond to make basic routine observations for cyanoHABs. You can join us, be a member of Citizen Science Learning Center and help cover the cost of sampling with your donations, which should be tax deductible. And by doing that, you become a pond keeper by observing and collecting water quality data using a mobile app survey on your phone. And the app, I'm gonna open it up, but here's the QR code for it. So if you want to see what the app looks like on your phone, and that way you have it. And this is what I would ask any of you to do. And this is what it looks like. If you decide you want to adopt a pond, whether it's one of the ones that we're already doing, having eyes on the pond more frequently is equally as beneficial. So it's just filling out your contact information, Um, okay, I'd have to fill this out, but there's just a series of questions that you ask that's asked, and then that basically the end is taking a couple of pictures and submitting it. Now the deal is here with this with the DEC. This form mimics the form that the DEC provides. And it has pictures of HABs, so you get an idea of what they look like when you're there. Um, but the DEC doesn't want to know about ponds that aren't suspected to be blooming. They only want this form to be filled out or their form to be filled out if you suspect the HAB is happening. So what we're asking for is you fill this out for us so that we can then post that information on our interactive map at some point. But if you notice that there's a HAB there's a link in ours that takes you directly to the DEC's HAB form, and then you fill that out, submit it to the DEC so that the DEC knows that there was a potential HAB occurring. So it's sort of a two-step thing if you happen to see a HAB. Okay, and that's, again, the QR code to the survey. And the next slide, this is our website. I'll just jump through these quick, and I can come back if anybody wants me to go back to the slide. And then this is my contact information. But if you put your contact information in from the very beginning, you put your contact information there, I will forward this information out to all of you. Okay. I know everybody's probably anxious to have dinner. And if there's any other questions that I can help, or if you want to stay on the call when everybody else goes and want to chat, I'd be happy to do that, or sometime in the future. So thank you all.
Thank you, Bob. That was great. That was, I know a little bit about your initiatives, but learning all of that was really enlightening and amazing work that you've been doing. So I will see if anyone has questions. Feel free to unmute yourself. And one question in the chat, Bob, was, can you remind us what is the jurisdiction of your work? Is it town of Southampton only?
Okay, you if you don't live in the town of Southampton and you live near a pond and you want to do this, you know, I'm not restricting ourselves to Southampton. So if you have a pond that you're concerned about, and you want to get involved and know, what's going on with your pond, and you want to get your community involved, we're happy to support you. And it would become part of a database. And the more that we have, I think, of this kind of stuff, the more we can convince the town and the county, let's kick this up a notch. And believe me, I've been speaking with Ann Welker at the Suffolk County Legislator. She's the South Fork. Greg Dorosky is the North Fork. I've had meetings with both of them. Tommy John Scavone, who was a town board member, is now our New York State legislator. So he's aware of what we're doing and is supportive. But if you live in a different legislative district, you might want to talk to your legislator as well for your area. Okay?
Great. Thank you so much, Bob.
You're very welcome. And sorry if I went so long, but hey, it's the teacher in me.
No, it was great. It was awesome. And everyone in the chat was saying thank you.
Great.
Please, Caroline said, please speak at the Quag Library.
Oh, well, I did reach out to them and I never really heard back from them. I'm doing another presentation at the Hampton Bays Library on Thursday at 7:00.
That's great. That's awesome.
I'll speak to the Quag Library as well. Sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Okay.
and thank you all for being here tonight. So hopefully we'll see you at the refuge soon. And if you have any questions for me, please feel free to email me. And I will send out this recording to everyone probably by tomorrow. So I think it'd be great, right, Bob, if you share it with someone who might be interested, they could learn about what you are doing at the Citizen Science Learning Center. So the
Yep.
more that we spread the word, I think people will realize what a big impact it has just to monitor.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not that hard.
Mm,
It's not that hard. I mean, if you want to take one step further, you can just get a thermometer and take the temperature because that's an important parameter and it's simple enough to do.
that's
But I want to
great.
thank you, Carol, also, and Quag Wildlife for your support. And certainly, my presentations at your location have been way more populated than I've had luck with the libraries. Um, it is what it is, and I thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Our pleasure, and it's great to work with you too. So I'll see you soon, Bob.
Okay, very good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carol.
Bye, everyone. Good
Oh,
night.
everyone.